It is the Final Word Cricket Podcast. Adam Collins with you for our Season 17 premiere. And alongside me, because Jeff's having a few days off in Berlin, is Matt Roller from ESPN Cricinfo. The heavy roller, a regular co-host on the dailies. I think this might be the first time you've actually sat in as a co-host on what's going to be a very busy weekly show. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Privileged to be here.
Yeah, end of season vibes, isn't it? I mean, we're recording this on the 1st of October. It's been raining all day. We had the sort of sodden end to the international summer with a DLS conclusion that Jeff did on the Daily Show the other day. And, you know, so it is for everyone. It's a weird feeling, isn't it, that we invest so much emotionally into those few months of the year where it's long light and there's cricket going on everywhere, and it's quite an abrupt end when the county championship and the international summer all end on the same day.
Absolutely. It's in the UK, it's getting dark at 7 o'clock. Yeah. I start the heating on for an hour on Sunday night. We're getting towards that time of year. It's suddenly the day's drawing in. But yeah, it's felt quite end of summer for a while, to be honest, with this season. I think probably because it's been such a busy year, even busier than usual for an English summer with that T20 World Cup in the middle of it. It really felt like by the time we got to the end of that Australia series, it was real fag end stuff. Yeah. Kind of half-strength teams being put out on both sides. And yeah, you finally get to this point where, yeah, it does always feel a bit sad, but don't worry, there's a men's test series starting on Monday and there's a T20 World Cup starting in no time at all either. So
yeah, that's right. I mean, the women's T20 World Cup, which we'll come to in a little bit, and England's men straight to Pakistan. Indeed, I think they take off today, don't they? So
yeah, I think they're in the air at the time of recording.
Wow, which gives a sense of how the way the modern world works. And you'll be off to Pakistan in a few days as well. You've been to Pakistan before on that T20 series that England slotted in before. Was it the 2022 World Cup? They went there for what was a really high-scoring series, and you went before a lot of others. I think we'd been maybe earlier in the year, but before anyone in the England pack went, you were the advanced party, so to speak.
Yeah, I think there were 5 written press over there for that T20 series, which was great fun, actually. We were in Karachi and Lahore, so 2 new cities for me this time, in Multan and Islamabad. A long stint in Multan at the start. I think it's 2.5 weeks there for the first 2 tests back to back, which could be an interesting experience. I hope the test lasts 10 days. But yeah, looking forward to getting out there.
Sounds like the England camp, from what I hear, are pretty cool with it being in Multan, because I'm sure you've heard why.
A bit of golf course
One
stuff.
of their favourite golf courses. So they played a test match there, of course, a couple of years ago, and Baz, by all reports, is elated that after dark, well, not even after dark really, is on days off between test matches, they'll have the chance to play on a course they're familiar with. So that's all ahead of us. Grand final weekend. So that was a big focal point for Jeff and I over the weekend. Getting up.
Swans lost.
Swans lost heavily to the Lions. So we had what always happens for me is that whoever's in town from Australia, be it on holiday or swinging through or doing their year out, as can often be the case with Aussie, I take them to the same place that I've been going to since 2017. So a whole bunch of people have been along across the time. I think Izzy came one year, Vish came one year, Sam Perry, when he lived in London, from the great cricketer, came along with me one year, and a lot of other mates along the way. Well, this year, because Australia were playing a one-day at Lord's the previous night, I said, well, Maxie, we've got to watch the grand final together. He got up at 5 a.m. after playing a one-day the night before and sat in a bowling alley full of Australians watching the Lions romp it in. So that was a nice way to end his stretch in London. And as we mentioned last week, the book is out at the end of this month, the 30th of October. It's called The Showman. I know you'll have a copy probably a lot sooner than that, Heavy, as the journos tend to.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well looked after by the publisher and pour through it and so on, and there'll be lots to pour through. On that theme, broadly speaking, we've got our live shows coming up they start on the 21st of November in Perth, so the night before the Perth Test match, and might be 2 nights before Perth, one or the other. No, night before Perth, 2 nights before. You know what? I can't remember. It's in the link tree, in the show notes. Click on there and come along, and if you're really lucky, you might get Maxie to sign you a book. That is how we're trending for at least a couple of the shows. This is a really busy show today, ranging from, as we say, the end of the county season. I mean, it was the end of recreational cricket on Sunday as well, my last hit out. Not that we're going to talk about that, but all the way through, up the pyramid, around the world. Test cricket in India, Test cricket in Gaul, as there always seemingly is at the moment. A series starting in about 5 minutes' time in Pakistan that we've already referred to. The Women's World Cup, which starts in a couple of days in the UAE, which we're going to be covering every show of with Daniel Norcross and Cam Ponsonby. And that might be a nice place to segue into my introduction of a new commercial partner of the Final Word Heavy. Usually it's Jeff and me for day one of these, but with the end of September means the end of our time with Westfield, as we explained last week, at least for now, because it's the end of the UK summer, and the start of our relationship with Ambassador Cruises. Now, you'd be familiar with Ambassador Cruises because they appear on some of the county shirts.
I was going to say, is it Essex maybe?
Essex, yeah. Essex and Warwickshire and Surrey have all got a relationship with Ambassador Cruises. So I thought what I'd do here is just explain who they are, where they fit in, and we'll tell the story of them in more depth over the next month or so. Britain's affordable quality cruise line. So they're a UK-owned organisation that operate across a number of worldwide destinations, premium value at an affordable price. But the key thing here from our perspective is that they've got a cricket tour coming up, a cricket legends festive getaway, as we're describing it, where between the 12th of December and the 19th of December, you can get on board a beautiful cruise ship with Graham Gooch, who's got more runs than anyone ever. Did a great interview with Jeff and me a couple of years ago on the Final Word. Jonathan Agnew, who's been the BBC cricket correspondent since 1991. Henry Blofeld, who we loved talking about when calling the shots for the extraordinary life he led as a freelancer before becoming one of the most loved voices on BBC. And Alex Tudor, who can tell you all about threatening the Aussies and getting it up them at Trent Bridge in 2001 and a number of other things he did in his really exciting Test career. So you get to rub shoulders with them sort of informally. There's also formal shows all the way through, high quality food and drink, and you're going to get to go to Amsterdam, Antwerp, and Rouen. In the case of Amsterdam and Antwerp, what do they have in common?
Great question. I'm stumped.
You're a sports nut. Two Olympic cities, Antwerp and Amsterdam.
I thought we were looking European Cups or something.
Yeah, no, maybe as well, possibly. All aboard the Ambition ship, one of two in the Ambassador fleet. So again, more on that, more on the cities you'll go to as we work through the month. Executive chefs, expert cocktail making, all the trimmings. The boat departs from the famous Tilbury docks for your 7 days of sailing. The beauty of this, you get to do the European travel without all the fuss of going to the airport, the ease and comfort of that. It's a terrific early Christmas present. That's how I see it anyway. It's the close season. We're talking about how flat we are that cricket season is coming to an end over here. Well, what better way to build into Christmas than spending 7 days with a bunch of other absolute cricket badgers talking cricket all day long?
Is that? I think England are in New Zealand about that time as well. So, through the night
on the boat, having some of those cocktails I was referring to before. Solo travellers, it works well for too. I've done a couple of these, not this type of cruise, but I've done long boat journeys in the past on my own. And it doesn't really matter because you kind of become mates with everyone that you're there with, and you're going to have the common bind of being cricket nuts. So, if I said that to you, this is a question without notice, how much would you think a 7-day cruise with all these cricket legends on a lovely boat would be?
Well, you'd be looking at, a few £100 a night, so probably, I don't know, pushing a couple of grand.
That's what I thought.
Yeah?
I thought this is going to be, but it's not. $5.59 to get in the door, and 10% off beyond that because you're a Final Word listener. So you do the math on what you deduct from there. But you consider what you would pay for a week in like you say, a hotel or an Airbnb going to a few European destinations. There is no way you would get it done for as cheap as that. All in GBP in sterling when you're on board as well, so you don't get stung by conversion fees and needing to worry about any of that sort of nonsense. And we've got this code, Final Word 10. It'll be in the show notes. That opens today. It's open until the 30th of November, so you've got a couple of months to consider whether you want to be on the voyage on the 12th of December. Ambassador Cruise Line, I'll get more smooth at this across the month. AmbassadorCruiseLine.com is the URL. Then from there, Final Word 10. All of that information will be in the show notes. It's a crackerjack deal. Ambassador Cruise Lines, the better way to holiday. Wonderful to have them with us.
I'm excited on your behalf, Colin.
You sold?
I think that's where I'm going to be at mid-December.
Right, into the main part of our show today. The biggest story in England cricket actually has nothing to do with the season that's just finished. It's to do with the season that'll be in 2025, and specifically how the teams and the counties, and I say the teams as it broadens out to the 100 as well, will be owned. The last time we had a long conversation on this was with Will McPherson from the Telegraph probably 4 or 5 months ago, when the announcement was made that September would be the month where the 49% chunks of the 100 teams will be sold. But it's a far bigger story than that now, with Hampshire, not the Southern Brave, but Hampshire being sold to the GMR Group for 120 million quid, which in essence is them being bought by the Delhi Capitals from the IPL. Matt, you've been writing about this for Cricinfo overnight. T20 is your stock and trade. Tell us exactly what's going on.
Well, I think the most interesting thing about this deal is just how long it has seemingly been in the pipeline. So I was on a call with Rob Bransgrove, who is obviously pretty much the guy that saved Hampshire, is how I think he's sort of generally described. But most recently, he's currently the chairman of Hampshire's parent company, not of the cricket club anymore, but of the parent company, which is called Hampshire Sports and Leisure Holdings. It's one of three privately owned PLC cricket clubs in the UK, along with Northants and Durham. The others are all members clubs, so they're societies. But basically, Bransgrove has been the majority shareholder. He has between 50 and 75%. I think it's about 60% of the shares. And he's decided, his time is done. He's got the 27 men's Ashes test, which was kind of his life's work. Get this ground started, get this whole business operation, save Hampshire, and get them into a position where at the top table of English cricket. And they're hosting a men's Ashes test for the first time in their history, which is obviously a huge accolade for any county club. Yeah. He decides that it's time to sell up, and he said nearly 2 years now he's been in this process, and nearly a year he's had this deal at least provisionally approved with GMR. It's taken a while to actually get to the point that they reached on Monday of this week, the last day of September, which was announcing that publicly and putting the details out there as to how it's going to be a multi-stage process where it starts with 52% of shares or thereabouts and eventually becomes 100% over the next 2 years. But the most interesting bit is that almost all of this predates a lot of what's going on with the 100 at the moment. Right. So there's this situation now where the ECB is slightly concerned, I think, that there might be some sort of almost attempt to buy one, get one free, get in the back door, circumvent their process that's being run by investment bankers at Rain in the US and Deloitte, and try and basically get ownership of Southern Brave via Hampshire, which I think will end up happening in some regard. But basically what the ECB have said, and I think what GMR and Hampshire both understand, is that they're going to have to pay fair market value for the other 49%. And in the event that they try anything funny, the ECB would basically withhold the 51% that is being transferred or is being planned to be transferred to the host venues of those 100 teams, or the host clubs of those 100 teams. So MCC in London Spirit's case, Surrey and Oval Invincibles case, Hampshire in Southern Braves case. But ECB could say, we don't actually want to transfer this because we think that there's something fishy going on here. Or they could even, in the most outlandish scenario, they could strip Southern Brave from Hampshire and move it to Bristol or wherever they fancied.
Right, and this was doing the rounds before the story broke yesterday. So Bikram Banerjee, who's the director responsible for the sell-off, effectively, of the 100, describing how if there was to be some, if I'm reading this correctly, and you can add to this thought, if there was to be some funny business around trying to almost throw in, the 100 teamers to steak knives, that they could intervene in this way. I wonder whether, the price tag that Hampshire have earned for this, which is a sizable one, might provide the ECB, like, will this be the sort of thing that bothers them? Because this model could be replicated across some of the other teams, right? I mean, in the case of Yorkshire and the advanced conversation with the Sunrisers Hyderabad owning organisation, I know that we've spoken recently to Mark Nicholas about what they intend to do with their partners with MCC and the probability of that being Mumbai Indians, although Nico didn't say that to us, but that's been widely reported, that there could be, and that's a bit different, I guess, because MCC is not a county, but what would preclude another county saying, there's the clever way of managing this?
Yeah, I think nothing specifically. I mean, at the moment, I suppose the obstacle would be that it takes a bit of time to convince members to sort of, they, in the example of Northants, who are the most recent team to become a members club, which was I think 7 or 8 years ago. You are literally asking the turkeys to vote for Christmas, saying, please, can you allow us to do this because it's in the financial interest of the club. So it's certain clubs there's a strong enough membership where they probably wouldn't want to do that. So at Lancashire, for example, they have some pretty active voices, I think, among the membership group, and I think they probably wouldn't be voting for that anytime soon. I doubt. I think what will happen in this Hampshire example is probably that GMR will, they've apparently, Bransgrove said yesterday they've approached Rain and said that they do plan to bid. I think most of the IPL franchises have at least got to that stage where they're saying that they have some interest in bidding on a team. And I would expect that GMR will end up paying a decent sum for that other 49% of Southern Brave, and therefore the 51% will go to Hampshire, which becomes GMR. So GMR will effectively become 100% owners of Southern Brave. I feel like from conversations I've had, most other counties, the management are reluctant to get rid of their own 51% in the short term because they just don't really know what the value of it is going to be. They don't know how it might change in 5 years. There's been such a stark change in county cricket's landscape in the last 5, 10, 15 years that I think that there's quite a few who are willing to sit it out and say, well, we don't know whether or not we're sat on a gold mine here. This is a free asset that we're effectively getting from the ECB. We're getting 51% of something for free, and we don't know what that's worth. So let's see what other people think it might be worth, and then let's make a more informed decision down the line. But I definitely think this deal, opens the door for further overseas private investment in county cricket down the line.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Like it's the step into the unknown. I mean, this would have been scarcely believable even 5 years ago. When was the 100 first mooted? Early 2019, early 2018, whatever it was. 6 years ago, 5 years ago. The idea that we would be in a position where you'd be endeavouring to buy a first-class county. Now, I know Hampshire are privately owned, but county cricket as a whole, we had Ben Bloom on the program earlier this year talking about his book and about the challenges that most counties have at the moment. Keeping the lights on might be an exaggeration. For some it is. For some it's a keeping the lights on question. Yet, so there'd be that at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, such an enormous sum of money is being brought in to theoretically by a club that competes in the county championship. How this might influence the decisions that ECB with their constituent parts make, if there are, half a dozen or more of the counties that are owned holus bolus by IPL franchises. I'm not saying that will happen immediately, but if that were to happen down the line, that'll reshape England cricket fundamentally. This won't be a sort of talking about the 3.5 weeks to 4 weeks in August that people get upset about, justifiably, I think, at the moment. It'll be a far more wide-ranging conversation about, well, does that 1 month in the calendar, does the 100 that at the moment occupies, yes, the marquee spot, but not too many weeks in the grand sweep of things. Does the does the 100 become an 8-week competition? Does the county championship get relegated far further down? Do the players find it impossible to compete in both competitions? These sorts of questions that were never meant to be on the table when the 100 was conceived of, now very much are front and centre, I reckon.
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing is that the ECB have always said that the reason they wanted to sell stakes in the teams in the 100 rather than the 100 itself was because they would then maintain control over the competition in the same way that the BCCI have with the IPL. So even if all of the franchise owners want a certain thing, if the BCCI say this doesn't suit Indian cricket more broadly, they can say we're not doing this. And we've seen that in recent weeks. That I think is pretty much what's happened with the number of games in the IPL. The TV rights deal was for 84 games, I think, this year rather than 74. And they've said we're keeping it at 74 because it doesn't suit us to increase it. It doesn't suit India's players. It doesn't suit their workload management, all that sort of thing. So it is an interesting thing that you then have the ECB having sort of had that argument, but then coming at it from a different angle now, where you have you potentially, in this logical conclusion of this argument, you then would have a certain number of counties owned by the same people owning the 100 teams, and you actually end up with a situation where ECB is sort of in notional control, but ECB rely on the counties to get stuff done in the most part. So yeah, from a governance point of view, they've signed it off. Richard Gould was quoted in the press release saying, he welcomed their arrival and all that sort of thing. And I suppose the tricky thing with this deal is knowing what's in it for GMR specifically, because Hampshire have been a privately run club, privately owned club for the best part of 20 years. This in some ways just changes them from a privately owned by Rob Bransgrove to Kiran Kumar Grandhi instead. It's not a huge difference. The fact that he's an Indian businessman rather than a guy from the UK shouldn't fundamentally change the fabric of English cricket. But there will also be people seeing just the 3 letters IPL and running scared really, and being alarmed by what's happening to county cricket in their opinions.
And the other little nugget that you had in your reporting on this yesterday was that Kevin Peterson was seemingly the glue that bound this deal together. Maybe not explicitly, maybe not with his financial clout, but his relationship going all the way back to the Delhi Daredevil days, Daredevils days rather, at the start of the IPL, and of course him being a long-term Hampshire player and having the relationships on both sides of the fence. And now those two threads have been drawn together.
Yeah, it's that's a pretty surefire way to wind people up in county cricket, isn't it? Talk about KP being involved in something related to the IPL. It's been a
well, it's actually what he said for a long time. Just to sorry to cut you off, but for a long time, Peterson, one of his social media bits was, we should franchise red ball cricket. We should franchise red ball cricket, and so on and so forth. And the natural response was, well, you can't franchise something that's state owned, right? The clubs aren't. It doesn't make it the franchise just because you have fewer teams or whatever. Like, to franchise is like, people often describe the Big Bash teams as franchises. They're not. They're owned by the states and owned by Cricket Australia. And similarly, at the moment with the 100, they're not franchises.
Yeah, they're teams.
Yeah, they are teams
or clubs or
whatever you want to call them. But this actually is the first step towards potentially franchising red ball cricket in a way that, again, it would be hard to get your head around what county cricket would look like with a blank slate, where the interests are far more directly geared around the movement of capital than it is around the movement of the red ball in May.
Yeah, I think, on Peterson, I think his involvement was quite incidental. I think the deal would probably have happened even if he didn't exist, but it is an interesting situation for sure. He was described, I think, as the common link between the two parties. He played for Hampshire from 2005 to 2010 and then spent 3 years with Delhi in those days as well. In terms of what's in it for him, I don't know whether, maybe he has a little bit of commission on the side. Maybe he just genuinely thinks it's the best thing for English cricket.
I reckon I don't think there's anything improper around his passion for it. He clearly wants this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been something that he's expressly said is going to be a good thing for however many years, and I believe that he believes it. I don't necessarily believe that he should believe it, but I think that's his view on it, is that county cricket would be better if it was basically the 8 clubs that host teams in the 100 playing in one league, and that would raise standards enough, and you would get the overseas in and all that sort of thing, and it would probably look a lot more like the Division 1 that he played in when he was coming through, and served him pretty well.
Yeah, well, arguably. I mean, then that goes to a whole different world. Then you have whole pack players.
Yeah, and then you have the that's pre-IPL as well, and also you obviously then some of those Div 1 clubs would have signed players from Div 2 clubs who then maybe would have been lost to the professional game if you just had 8 teams, rather than if you had 150 pros in England and Wales male pros rather than 400 or so at the moment. It would be a very different situation if that was the only county cricket that existed.
And I should say, by the way, we're out of September now, right? And September was the month, right? So there has been the idea floated that this may not get done in time for season 2025. This is talking about the 100 teams, by the way, not further county sell-offs, even though who knows what will happen in Yorkshire. We've heard, I guess, the Graves operation floating that maybe Yorkshire could go down this path as well. But just in terms of the 100 teams, we've heard from reports this week that it might no longer be for 25. Now, that would be an interesting state of play, given the suggestion from all the briefings was that everybody wanted to buy this, and Ryan Reynolds was going to be out at Sapphire Gardens next year. Probably not. Yeah,
there's been a lot of back and forth on this in the last week. So Vic Banerjee, who, as you said, is running the process from the ECB side, went on a podcast last week and basically explained the process in quite big detail and said we're not in a rush here. If the right money doesn't come in, if the right deals aren't there, we could enter 2025 where I think they're seeing it as a bit of a transition year. I think they have for a while, to be fair, where they're saying, maybe the salary increases that we've got planned, which are pretty substantial, aren't going to happen next year. Maybe there'll be a bit of an increase next year. Maybe 6 teams will be privately owned next year and 2 will still be run by the ECB, essentially, because the deal hasn't quite been there and it's not quite gone through. Maybe some of the private ownership has come in, but not quite quick enough for us to have changed the names and changed the brands. So we're going to keep the brands for an extra year. All that sort of thing. So it does look like it's going to be an awkward year. I really don't know what the 100 looks like in 2025. I think I almost have a clear idea what it might look like in 2027 than I do in 2025 at this rate. But yeah, Lalit Modi, the IPL founder and original chairman, is now serving his life ban from the BCCI and based in London, has been running his mouth over the past week or so. I think he described it as a big fat Ponzi scheme at one point.
Always good for a quote.
Which he honestly, to have missed his time and as a cricket journalist, he was a quote machine. But yeah, ECB responded during one of the ODIs. Richard Gould was on Test Match Special. I think the Lords one maybe on Friday, and he said, I don't really recognise these comments. We've got over 100 interested parties. To be honest, given the state that franchise cricket is in at the moment, with the proliferation of franchises we've seen in the past couple of years, I fully believe that there will be enough bidders for them to get decent prices at this moment in time. As to whether that quite meets the target that ECB have sort of set themselves for capital injection, as to what that looks like for county cricket in a few years' time, that's a lot harder to predict. But I do at this stage believe that there is enough interest. I think that's right. The tricky thing to cover this journalistically is that both sides obviously want you to believe something completely different. The prospective investors want you to think that the process is going very poorly, because that then drives down the price of the teams. And the ECB
and that's a strategy.
Happens in business
all the time.
Exactly.
You talk down the asset you're about to buy.
Exactly. And ECB want you to think that the process is so unbelievably competitive that someone, panics and accidentally bids $1 billion for London Spirit. So
who's to know? It looks, there's so much to play out of this. It's not going to be I don't know, what would you call them? The Southern Daredevils playing in the county championship in 2 years' time, but, a version of that. Watch this space. Just on IPL and the new regulations that came in this week, but Jay Shah flexing some muscle on the way out the door, because there is a process taking place right now with respect to Jay Shah being replaced before we get to December 1, which is when he'll finish up. Might come to that in a moment. But on the IPL side of things, you're right, 74, not 84 games next year. There was the chance to expand it up 10 games because India's men are just too bloody busy. They'll have a World Test Championship final to play on the 11th of June at Lords, and they don't want to compromise winning that by stretching out the IPL a few more days. We saw even in 2023 that the IPL final was, 4 or 5 days before the World Test Championship final began, and it did have an effect on the build-up to that. So the IPL will finish in May next year as per the original structure. But it can rise up to 94 games by 2027. And, as we get closer and closer to, I guess, the singularity, isn't it, where this just is our world. It's just the IPL's in operation somewhere, and the satellite IPL tournaments, with the biggest one of them all going for more like 4 months instead of 3 months. So get ready for that. But there's all these other bits and bobs as well, like restricting players. So if you don't put your name forward for the mega auction every third year, you can't just slot in the mini auction in the way that Cummins and Stark have done in the last 2 years. They're the best two examples, I think.
Yeah.
So you're basically being forced to go all in for 3 years or don't bother at all.
I think there's been a feeling for a while among the IPL franchises that overseas players generally, but probably more specifically ones who have big central contracts, so England and Australia, kind of have the best of all worlds at the moment, in that they can pick and choose when they decide to play. They know that the demand for their services is going to be high because they have big reputations, and because they're very good players for the most part as well. And they basically kind of mop up in the way that Stark and Cummins did, in the way that Sam Curran did the year before that, and Stokes as well. And quite often, in the case of some Australian and English players, both CA and ECB to some extent have played fast and loose with the regulations, in that because of the fact that you go into an auction, it's an unknown thing, you can't negotiate your salary, you get picked at a certain amount, players will go in, often at the highest possible base price, which is not actually, the base price isn't actually that high compared to the pay you can get in some leagues. So players will go in at 200 grand in pounds, will get bored of their base price, will think 200 grand for 8 weeks in India just before I play a home season, or in Australia's case when I could be having a break or whatever it might be. And then a couple of weeks out from the tournament might say, actually guys, can you diagnose me with a little niggle so I can withdraw from this, or I'm pulling out on whatever grounds it might be. And then the IPL franchises sit there and think, well, why on earth should we sign this guy again, or why should we trust Australian players and English players not to pull out? So this feels like broadly a response to that
and also
scenario.
The ban that would kick in if you do pull out at the last minute, you don't get to play the IPL for the next 2 years. That was probably the most strident language in the press release.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I'm really interested to see how this actually plays out in practice, because firstly, there's this thing where overseas players, you have to enter the big auction if you want to be picked up. I think there's going to have to be loopholes with that, because, for example, let's say Shamar Joseph gets his go in the IPL last year. I think he hardly played, maybe played once for Lucknow, but he, at the equivalent stage in the mega auction cycle, was probably at home working as a logger.
Right.
So what happens to the guy who is Shamar Joseph's position now, who becomes a superstar in 2 years' time and wants to get into the mini auction, but they say, oh, you didn't register for the big auction in 2024. I think there's still going to be a way for him to get in, surely. So maybe it only applies to cap players or something like that.
Well, there always seems to be, right? So I mean, even the fact that we've now got the retention policy changing, 6 players can be retained, 5. Well, you can add meat to the bone here, but there's one slot there for the uncapped player.
Yep.
And they've changed the categorisation of an uncapped Indian player so that Dhoni will play again.
Right? Yeah, effectively, yeah.
So just explain why they needed to do this to get Dhoni another season.
Basically, because they set the retention value so that it's quite expensive to keep players, because the whole idea is to have competitive balance as much as possible, but you have some element of keeping the players that are associated with the brand. So Dhoni has always played for Chennai, Virat has always played for RCB.
Except for the couple of years when Chennai were kicked out of the comp.
Yeah, true.
The spot.
Yeah, when he was at the Pune Supergiants.
That's right. Rising Pune Supergiant. Or whatever.
But yeah, you basically have a situation where it's pretty punitively expensive to retain too many players. So this is a nice loophole, which has usually been used so you can keep the young players that you've helped develop who haven't quite yet made it to international cricket. But the loophole is now that if you've been retired from international cricket for a certain period of time, which just so happens to apply to Dhoni and then about 2 other players in the whole league, then you automatically requalify as uncapped. Capped and uncapped is a pretty obvious binary where once you become it, you can't stop being it. But he somehow earned back his uncapped status, which is an interesting situation. But
it's proof that anything is possible. To be possible.
But there could be some really interesting, there could be some legal cases coming up on this stuff, because for example, you take the example of Harry Brook this year, who gets bought by Delhi at the auction for 400,000. He decides to withdraw at relatively short notice because of the fact that his grandmother, who he's very close to, is on a deathbed, and he spends his time with his family instead. Delhi publicly, very accommodating about it, but that wouldn't qualify under, the ECB didn't prove with a medical certificate that he had an injury. That was compassionate leave, effectively. Yeah. So I don't know what happens in that scenario, because it's not in the regulations, as far as I can tell at the moment, for there to be this loophole. So if they were to, in that situation, try and ban Brook for 2 years, that feels ridiculous. But maybe that's what they're going to plan to do. And in that case, could he take that to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and say, how is this allowed? Is this not restraint on trade for something that's a personal situation? I don't know. Yeah,
speaking of court, as a crude segue here, I mentioned it was the AGM last week for the BCCI, and there is a bit of a push to work out what happens after Jay Shah has his ICC coronation on the 1st of December. Rohan Jaitley, who's the president of Delhi at the moment, he's the son of Arun Jaitley, who the Kotla was renamed after in Delhi, who was Modi's first finance minister for 5 years after he was first elected in 2019. So a senior BJP minister before he passed away. It's his son who looks like he's in the box seat to take over as the boss of the BCCI, and in turn the most powerful person in cricket alongside Jay Shah. So that's just going on. Reports coming out of India, nothing that we've done in terms of the journalism, just based on what people over there are saying at the moment. But that would, I suppose, further consolidate the power base in Indian and therefore global cricket.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think it's pretty clear if you spend any time in India, the link between BCCI and BJP, isn't it? I think particularly struck me in Dharamsala during the World Cup about this time a year ago, where driving through the town, you have a whole load of billboards with faces of 2 people on. One is Anurag Thakur, who is the sports minister for Modi's government, and then you have one who is Arun Dhumal, who's the IPL chairman, who I think is Anurag Thakur's younger brother. Who runs the IPL. Yeah. And, I'm speculating here entirely, but again, could be in the running for that BCCI position vacated by Jay Shah. I wouldn't be surprised if he was in the running. So it's pretty clear that there's a pretty tight relationship between those two bodies. But it's not hugely surprising, I guess, is it?
Yeah, I think since the first time we had you on as a guest a couple of years ago, so much has happened in global cricket, and a lot of it revolves around the conversations we've had in the first segment today. All right, we'll take a breather on the other side of it. Lots and lots of Test cricket and a bit of county championship cricket to wind us out as well.